evening, everyone. On behalf of the London Luminaries, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's event. It's always inspiring to gather together in celebration of the rich tapestry of West London's heritage, the places, the people, the ideas that have shaped this remarkable city. For those joining us for the first time, the London Luminaries is a collaborative group of heritage volunteers who support many of West London's most significant historic sites. Together, we aim to shine a light on the stories, the architecture and the social histories that connect these places, from grand houses and landscape gardens to hidden corners of cultural innovation. Through talks and shared research, we seek to foster collaboration between historic sites and engage new audiences with London's remarkable heritage. Through your support of the London Luminaries, we've been able to raise over £40,000, which has been split between our incredible properties. So please do donate for your tickets, as it truly means a lot. But of course, heritage is for all and it should be free, so you can also enjoy it for free, and that's our gift to you. Normally our series is chaired by Professor Judith Hawley, and she's wonderful. Her insights are such a valuable part of the London Luminaries' work. However, Judith is not able to join us this evening, and so I'll be chairing tonight's talk in her place. I don't have the wisdom and the knowledge, but I am an integral part of the London Luminaries team and bring a lot of enthusiasm to the role. And I'm normally behind the camera on each of these talks, twiddling the knobs and setting things up. This wouldn't be possible, however, without the incredible volunteer stars behind this screen. And huge thanks go to Ricky, Robert, Angela, and Chris, who is currently fielding any latecomers. But now to today's talk. This evening, we turn our attention to one of the true jewels of London's architectural landscape, Chiswick House. Designed in the early 18th century by Richard Boyle, the 3rd Earl of Burlington, Chiswick House stands as a pioneering example of Palladian style in Britain, a building that not only changed the course of British architecture, but also reflects the ideals of enlightenment, harmony, reason, and beauty. But behind this beautiful building lies some incredible personalities, some that are well known, and some that are a little less known. Our speaker tonight, Nadege Forde-Vidal, brings a deep knowledge and passion for Chiswick House and its wider historical and cultural context. Nadege has worked extensively in heritage interpretation and historic house research, helping to bring these grand spaces to life for modern audiences. Her insights into the lives, designs and ideas behind Chiswick House promises to illuminate not just the architecture itself, but the people ambitions that made it possible. So please join me in giving a warm London Luminaries welcome to Nadege Forde-Vidal as she takes us on a journey through the history, artistry and enduring legacy of Chiswick House through the life of James Cumberlidge. Nadege.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. And thank you to all the members of London Luminaries for inviting Chiswick House to come share some of the work that we've been doing again with you all this evening. And of course, to everybody online tonight who tore themselves away from celebrity traitors to be with us tonight. I'm so glad that you could all join us. Looks like a really great turnout, so thank you. Personally, I'm delighted to have been asked to represent Chiswick House and Gardens Trust once again, especially as the person whose life we're going to be exploring this evening has played quite a big part in much of my research over the last few years. And I think was in fact mentioned in my very first contribution to the Luminary series back in 2021. So welcome back to the fascinating life story of James Cumberlidge. The recovery of James's story, as far as I'm aware, started with Dr. Richard Hewlings several decades ago, who somewhat unusually for the time published his research into Black people at Chiswick house in an article. When I arrived at Chiswick in 2019, I was quite keen to explore the less well-known characters associated with the site and the house, and this article definitely drew my attention. I began digging a little bit deeper into some of the other potential individuals of African heritage that were connected not just to the house and the site, but the Burlingtons and the Devonshire families. So far, we have discovered 10 individuals, both named and unnamed, with very different origins, languages, trajectories, but shared experience, resilience, and a certain amount of agency. Unlike most of the others, we know exactly what James Cumberlidge looked like, as a child at least, and the clothes that he wore. Thanks to this portrait you can see before you of the Burlington family with James, that was completed by Van Loo in 1739. This portrait now hangs at Chatsworth and was the centre of an exhibition they did on childhood last year, actually. It's quite hard to age James in the portrait, but take a kind of guesstimate that he's not yet really reached double figures, which kind of suggests a birth year of around 1730. Even more uncommon is the fact that we have his full name, his signature, an insight into his hobbies and his skills, and probably enough archive material now to fairly faithfully reconstruct the major events in his life. James's story was given an additional boost actually last year, as I say, and as part of the exhibition on childhood at Chatsworth, they also funded a report into the Van Loo painting by a man called Dr. Edward Town, which revealed a lot of what had happened to James after he left Chiswick, and also opened the door to a whole new set of questions. James has also played quite a significant role in the Black Chiswick Through History project at Chiswick House and Gardens, certainly for the last few years. Members of the local community, in fact, have responded to his life story with artwork, music, impressive interactive resources that celebrate not just James, but also the wider framework, his family, Black community, and Black achievement. So if you do get a chance, please take a look at the Chiswick House and Gardens website. The fact that you can now Google James Cumberlidge and find so many resources about him across the web is so rewarding. Knowing that his story is reaching the public and how many countless others we can also give a voice to is quite a thrill. Now, the word extraordinary that I put in the title should really have been in inverted commas, because James was by no means exceptional in his achievements. London's historic Black community shattered the illusions of race and class. Against the odds, they were highly motivated, taking every opportunity to navigate barriers and push through glass ceilings. Men and women with diverse cultural heritage and language were well-educated, high achievers, skilled professionals and entrepreneurs, represented at every social and economic level. They challenged stereotypes, forming a successful and inspiring middle class that traditional historical narratives still fail to fully acknowledge or celebrate. These individuals and their families, like James's, were absorbed into white British society over time. It would be great to be able to start at the beginning of James's story, his birthday, for example, where he was born, who his parents were, but we can't confirm any of those details as yet. We've assumed that James was born sometime around 1730, but we have no idea where. The Cumberlidge family appear to have had connections with the West Indies, many changing their names to Cumberbatch over time. Here, in front of you, you can see a reference, excuse me, to a Thomas Cumberlidge, who was a merchant in Barbados, who passed away in 1717. But the Burlington family also had links to the colonies. They were amongst the first to invest in the Royal African Company that transported over 30,000 Africans to the West Indies over a period of 40 years or so. And Lord Burlington's great-great-grandfather, the first Earl of Cork, as you can see here, was instrumental in establishing the so-called Munster plantations in St Christopher, better known as St Kitts. Now, at this point, I would like to make you all aware that some of the source material we're about to see contain words and phrases that are offensive and subject matter that is highly emotive. That said, moving on. In addition to these strong mutual family ties to the colonies, a will was discovered in the National Archives marking the death of a Christopher Cumberlidge in Fulham, just a short distance from Chiswick. In the will, we learn that Christopher Cumberlidge died in Fulham in the winter of 1737. He gave his trusted enslaved servant Thomas his freedom, a yearly income, and clothing. This certainly seems to be more than coincidence, especially given that James appears to join the Chiswick household shortly after Christopher Cumberlidge's will is put into effect. So many questions arise. Was James also enslaved by Christopher Cumberlidge as a child? Would he then, as a minor, have been freed the same time as Thomas? Was he related to Thomas in any way? And how did they both come to be in Fulham? Were they brought here by the Cumberlidge family from the West Indies, as many others were, or by those with connections to the colonies? Or was James bought here? Purchased in one of the many coffee houses that littered the City of London, or sold privately through newspaper adverts, or, as reflected in the growing number of Black British community of the time, was he born here? Like Elias Blake, seen here in an advert posted in a newspaper in 1761, who was born in Reigate, or the West sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, born in Sunbury in the early 1700s. The questions and possibilities are endless. So how did James become a page boy at Chiswick? Was he hired out by Christopher Cumberlidge before he passed away, like this young boy just a few years later? Was Thomas responsible for James after Christopher's death? Did he get him the position at Chiswick, or were the Burlingtons performing an act of charity, as they had in the past? Confirmed by this letter, written by Lady Burlington in 1729, not long before we believe James was born. It mentions a 3-month-old baby girl, and Lady Burlington says to her husband, "I am offered a black girl of 3 months old. It belongs to one of Mrs. Franklin's back women who came over and was unluckily with child on shipboard." So essentially, she is asking her husband for advice as to whether to save the child from returning to the colonies and plantation life. However, James's position as page boy was procured, it was a more than sensible option for the time. It would have provided a young boy with a level of security that was fairly rare for the time. He would have been accommodated, fed and educated by the Burlingtons, who were duty-bound to mould him into a good Christian. Through a baptism, though a baptism record still evades us. There is one example, an entry for 1730 for St James, Piccadilly, just obviously the same parish as Burlington House, which could well refer to James. If so, he may well have been connected to the Burlington family from early childhood, like the baby mentioned above. We can only hope he was treated kindly, though the evidence is obviously only circumstantial, The Burlingtons were a family with a widespread reputation for piety and charity that they were keen to see to uphold, and they were committed and active supporters of the Foundling Hospital, established to protect vulnerable young children and prepare them for the future. James is likely to be one of the 3 boys being taught to read and write by a local Chiswick schoolmaster in 1738, shortly after Christopher Cumberlidge's demise. At the same time he was posing for the Van Loo portrait that we saw earlier, his education was continuing also. Here we can see that he is being taught to read, write and accounts for 2 quarters, that's 6 months, I would presume, in preparation for a life and a career a bit beyond that of a child attendant. We also, excuse me, have his surname. So Cumberlidge is first found in the invoices from the tailor who made the blue livery that he wore in the portrait. His uniform appears to have matched that of Lady Burlington's footman, a logical choice given all 3 remained at her side on a daily basis. Within a decade, James's role in the household had changed dramatically. As well as receiving regular pocket money, as you can see here on the right at the bottom of the list that he has recorded, and it also gives us insight into his daily life and interests. We also, obviously now, have his signature preserved in ink. He purchased a variety of books, pamphlets and sermons. He bought toys for Lady Burlington's grandchildren, hired the horses, paid the gardeners and gave alms to the poor. And when needed, he would step into roles more formally in the household. So he is occasionally listed as a footman, alongside a close friend, James Busby, as you can see here, numbers 9 and 10. By the time James was in his mid-20s, Lady Burlington had lost all of her children and her husband. Leaving her stricken by grief, James became her carer, confidant, and companion. Perhaps unsurprisingly, in the face of so much family loss, James marries the same year and begins to build his own family. You can see James Cumberlidge and Mary's Story of St James's in Westminster. A brief note found in Surrey archives sheds a bit more light on James and Mary's relationship, revealing that the 4th Duke of Devonshire, Lady Burlington's son-in-law, had assisted their union by providing Mary with urgent funds to free her from a previous relationship. So here you can see it reads, sorry, the quality is not fantastic. Mr. Evans, house steward to His Grace the Duke of, he originally writes Bedford, so he's obviously forgotten who he works for, but corrects himself to Duke of Devonshire in Piccadilly, has Mr. Cumberlidge's bond to pay Mary Cumberlidge, now the supposed wife, concubine to, or etc., to Richard Molby, glazier and painter in the parish of Mary le Bon, has had several children to said Molby. Her maiden name was Mary Story. So we know this is referring to the same woman in the marriage certificate. So it seems that James inherited a ready-made family and provided support for Mary's children, maybe trying to become somewhat of the father figure that he may not have had. But James also began taking responsibility for another member of the Chiswick household, a young man called Kit, notably short for Christopher, possibly another Cumberlidge. He might also have been employed as a page boy, but no records as yet have confirmed exactly what his role in the household was. David Garrick, the famous actor, playwright and close friend of the Burlingtons, described James, or Jim, as his friend, as you can see here in the last line. In one of these letters, Garrick referred to Kit as Jim's brother. But whether this word reflects an actual known blood connection or a sense of kinship from shared heritage or experience background, we may never know. but the tone itself is quite difficult to swallow. As well as being utterly patronising, it suggests that James and Kit were perceived as some sort of Enlightenment experiment. We explored the potential members of James's social network, his neighbour, William Hogarth, their mutual friend, who we've already discussed, David Garrick, and of course, Dr. Samuel Johnson, whose dictionary James bought 2 copies of shortly after publication. James's contacts and work locations may have led to interactions with the likes of Handel, Francis Barber, Dido Bell, Mozart, and Ottobah Cogwana, as well as other members of the free black community in London, navigating life amongst the movers and shakers, entrepreneurs like the salon owner and hat maker Jean-Baptiste Gilbert, activists and authors like Alauda Equiano and Ignatius Sancho. We now know that life for James and his family changed dramatically after Lady Burlington's death in 1758. He'd been at her side for 20 years or so and had cared for her during a very long illness. He'd only been married for 4 years with children and a wife to support, so he must have been quite worried about what would happen next and what his status was. Lady Burlington's son-in-law, the 4th Duke of Devonshire, William Cavendish, who also happened to be Lord Chamberlain of the royal household, found him a new job. Rising the ranks, this time to heady heights, and showing yet even more skill and ambition, James left Chiswick to become trumpeter in ordinary, first to King George II and a year later to King George III. He remained in this role for almost 25 years. Hiding in plain sight, his name happens to be listed on the British History Online website, alongside those that held the position in the same year, including a man called Snow. Snow's father was Valentine Snow. He was the sergeant trumpeter, a position for life, from 1753 to 1770, and would clearly have known James well. Here he is in a portrait by Michael Dahl, who also painted the Burlingtons. Valentine was replaced by a Mr. Thomas Harris, probably the Thomas Harris listed here in the royal household accounts, who'd played alongside James in 1759 and even found himself a witness for Handel's will when he died the same year. James was far from the first black trumpeter to be employed in the royal court of British monarchs. The first known image of a black man in England is that of freeman John Blank, trumpeted to both King Henry VII and VIII. But more contemporary examples include William Douglas, better known as the Black Prince, who trained with the famous John Grano, another of Handel's trumpeters. Douglas was well known around London, performing benefit concerts at Hickford's Great Room in the Haymarket for several years before becoming a royal trumpeter himself in October 1723. And another of Grano's students, John Anthony, who played the violin, trumpet, and taught the French horn, no less. Musicians of African heritage were employed in a number of capacities beyond the royal court. Many, including kettle drummers, oboists, and French horn players, during the day played for military units, and in the evening performed in theatres, pleasure gardens, and private homes. It's intriguing that so far we've found no mention in the archives of any instruments or tuition for James. So where did he acquire his skill with the trumpet? We know that he played the natural trumpet, as it's the only type available at the time and had no vowels, no keys. So it took a lot of skill to get the notes right using just your lips. But they were very long and had a much lower pitch. One answer may well be that this type of trumpet was already very, very well known across Africa and had had strong and long-standing associations with ritual and royalty for many millennia. So was James already familiar with this type of instrument and how to play it? In Europe, as in Africa, Trumpets represented royal authority and dignity. Royal trumpeters took part in processions, played fanfares announcing the monarch's arrival. They performed at royal events, pageants, and masquerade balls. They played at coronations, funerals, baptisms, proclamations of war, peace, and the inauguration of new kings and queens. So as part of that royal court retinue, James accompanied the king and queen to their various palaces across the country. But his main place of work was Hampton Court Palace in Surrey. The 25 years or so that James remained at court was certainly eventful. There was the 7-Year War, slave rebellions in Montserrat, Louisiana, and the First Carib War, shortly followed by the American War of Independence, all accompanied by a growing call for abolition. The formation of groups like the Sons of Africa and the publication of the life stories of several previously enslaved individuals. One wonders how these events and movements impacted James and his family. The same year that James became a trumpeter, Handel passed away. He had become the most popular composer in the country and was a firm favourite of King George III and his wife Queen Charlotte, both of whom were keen music lovers and musicians in their own right. It's possible that Handel and James met before through the Burlingtons, who were Handel's patrons when he first arrived in London, and encouraged him actually to invest in the Royal African Company, and provided him with a home at Burlington House for several years. So James would have played one of Handel's pieces, Zadok the priest, at the royal coronation of King George III and Queen Charlotte that took place on the 22nd of September 1761. This is actually the coronation ticket. Zadok the priest had been composed by Handel for King George II in 1727 and has been played at every coronation since. The considerable income that James received as a royal trumpeter enabled him to buy land in Surrey, close to Hampton Court, in the 1770s, in a place called Hersham. So you can see this is quite an old map. It is dated up to 1610. You can see Hampton Court Palace on the right-hand side, and just across the river under the bend is Walton. Hersham's a small village just outside. So buying land in Hersham gave James Cumberlidge the right to vote. But though as yet we found no evidence to prove that he did so, it also importantly confirms his status at this point in time as a free man in the eyes of the law. Otherwise, he would not have been able to buy land under any other sort of status. And we know that he leased some of this land for some time before selling it to John Frederick, Sir John Frederick, no less, who at that point in time was busy expanding his estate at Burwood Park. So we know that the Cumberlidge family remained in that area, and new members indeed were arriving. So St Mary's Church in Walton-on-Thames, as you can see here, this is a baptism that occurred on the 19th of June 1781, young James Cumberlidge. Now this could be a son, but it could also potentially be a grandson. We can see the mother's name is given as Eliza, so Elizabeth, not Mary. But given the fragility of life at the time, she may well have been James's second wife, or potentially a daughter or daughter-in-law. By the 1780s, the number of trumpeters and their pay estimated at nearly £150 per annum, which would include things like fees of honour. But we could see from the previous document that James was provided with all of his accommodation. So, as I said, by the 1780s, the trumpeters and pay were being much reduced. And this was part of a large money-saving effort on behalf of the Crown, which were realising they were somewhat stretched in terms of budget. And this probably motivated James to actually retire in 1783, though we can't overlook the fact that he was clearly overlooked himself for promotion to sergeant trumpeter. But he did also receive a pension. Records show that James and his family were still living in Walton-on-Thames, first in a property owned by Henry East, which you can maybe see here. The middle line has 2 entries for Henry East. So he's living in his property himself, but also renting a property that he owns. So where you can see it says late Cumberlidge, that actually refers to not the fact that he's passed away or anything, but that he has recently moved to a different property. So they moved from Mr. Henry East's property in Walton to that of an Arthur Kempland, which you can see in the second line down. That's where we find James Cumberlidge residing. Now, Arthur Kempland, with a little bit more research, turned out to be an officer of the East India Company who was very, very rarely at home. So these records are great because they also give us a real insight as to who the Cumberlidge's neighbours were, which would be a real lovely avenue for further exploration going forward. And maybe we could do a little bit more research about what living in Walton might have been like in the 1780s to get a bit more of a concept of what day-to-day life was like for the Cumberlidge family during this period. Unfortunately, in 1788, James's name is replaced in the land tax lists with that of widow Cumberlidge. So he passes away at an estimated age of around 60 and was also buried in the local parish churchyard of St Mary's. His namesake, James Jr., if we just seen, was only 7 at the time, but he remained in Walton until his death in 1861, which suggests that the rest of the family probably did too, which may mean that James's descendants could still be living in that area today. So the research into James's life continues, as do efforts, of course, to shine a spotlight on his achievements and those of the wider Black community. And we're all really looking forward at Chiswick House to giving all the other African residents that we've discovered a voice over the years to come. So we have produced this fantastic animated digital collage with the West London Ghanaian Association this year on the Chiswick website, because it's a fascinating bit of work full of music and joy and a real celebration of James's life and his achievements.
Hidden voices long forgotten, stilled by the passage of time, dulled into oblivion by faded memory. But we are many, we are legion. Throw away the shackles of time, sound the horn, beat the drum to the rhythm of our lives. Let our voices be heard, silent voices no more.
Thank you so, so much, Nadege. That was fascinating. And it's just so special to be able to understand a little bit more about all of the people that lived at Chiswick. So thank you so much for shining a light on that. And before we go to our questions, just a tiny little plug for our next in the series, which is a talk by Ed Harris. And he's going to be talking about Twickenham Museum and the Twining Tea dynasty and the social housing in Victorian Britain. Please do join us, and please do think about donating to support the work of all the historic properties that we work and serve. And you know, kind of for all our London Luminaries listeners, please do have a look at Chiswick House's website. There's some fantastic things. And actually on the 2nd of December, there's a winter walk by Rosie Files, who was a previous London Luminary speaker when she was talking about Ham House. So there are lots of lovely links to go and tell
Can
us.
I just let you know also, I mean, if you are history buffs, there's the 12th Knights. So they're dressing the house in like proper Georgian opulence. So it may well be worth going to see it, because you'll never see the house like it again. So it's supposed to be some sort of dinner party for Georgiana Cavendish, the Duchess of Devonshire. So it might be something well worth a treat. I think I'm definitely going to be going. Check out what's going on.
Thank you so much, Nadege. So grateful for your time. Take care.